in the city has to abide by this rule, and they cannot evict anyone for any reason during this time period. How long is the moratorium for? It's up to June 20th. And what to expect when it's lifted. When it's lifted, there's a number of things to expect. First, it is possible to be evicted. So if you did get an eviction notice within the time period of March to June, the eviction notice has to be at least within the 30 days. If you received it, for example, June 19th, then you would have to wait the 6 to 14 days of that notice before you can be evicted. If you received an eviction notice in March, the marshal would have to reserve that marshal's notice, and it is not effective because it's older than 30 days. Another thing to expect is that the landlords will be able to start eviction proceedings against you. So you will be receiving notices in the mail, or someone will be knocking on your door to provide you notices. A potential for extension of moratorium. There is a potential for the moratorium to be extended depending on what's going on with this pandemic. It is possible that it may be extended beyond June. It actually has been extended, I believe, twice already. So if the city is still on lockdown, then it's likely that the moratorium will be extended. So in regards to the eviction moratorium, you should, as I stated earlier, you cannot be put out from your apartment. If you are locked out during this time period, then you must call the police, and after you can call us and we can start an illegal lockout proceeding or a post-eviction proceeding on your behalf. And the court is allowing for emergency filings for these types of cases. So you can call us at any time between 9 to 5 and we can start an action for you. As I said, it's till June 19th. After that, it can be extended. Rent has not been canceled. A lot of people have asked us this, whether they have their obligation to still pay rent during this time period. They do. You need to still pay your rent. If, however, you are suffering a hardship because of the pandemic, then you have to reach out to your landlord and speak to them about making some sort of arrangements with them. You could be brought to court for unpaid rent, but only when the court is reopened. The court at this time is not accepting any new filings for non-pay or holdovers, only emergency actions. That hasn't been lifted yet, but it's unclear as to when it will be lifted. The court is talking now about doing non-essential, non-emergency actions, but that is dealing with the current cases that are on the caseload now. It's unclear as to when they would reopen for new filings. So if you're having a hard time paying rent, what should you do? The possible agreements with your landlord is a payment plan, a rent reduction, or rent freeze. I'm just going to talk about the possibilities or the considerations you should have when dealing with this type of hardship. You should speak with your landlord right away because the landlord has to evaluate the best way to deal with this. You don't want the relationship to break down from the onset. So it is best to have an open dialogue with the landlord. Say, hey, I got laid off. I need to work on an agreement with you. I don't want to lose my apartment, but I can't pay right now. What can I do? So one thing you should do is speak to the landlord. The second is to collect documents of hardship. You should show that you have been laid off from your job, unemployment application is pending, and also keep your receipts. So for example, you could not afford to pay the rent because you had to buy food for your household. You should keep the receipts for the food. All other emergency items, for example, you had to go to the hospital, you had to get medication. These things you should keep the receipts of, showing why you weren't able to pay your rent. Also, you should know that the landlord may be provided some assistance from the government in regards to their mortgage. There is more mortgage forbearance that is happening for about 3 months up to 6 months. And that could be a way that you negotiate with your landlord and tell the landlord, hey, I know that there's a forbearance in place. Is it possible I can hold out on paying my rent at this time because you don't have to pay your mortgage? Can we work out some sort of deal? The landlord should consider the fact that it's going to be really hard to re-rent the apartment during this time. Also, the government aid, as I stated, and that everyone is experiencing hardship. and your payment history. So if you've been consistently paying on time, and this is the first time that you've ever fallen behind, that is a huge thing to bring to your landlord's attention and letting him know, hey, I've always been a good tenant. I just need an opportunity here. Work with me. If you don't have a very good payment history, then you should explain why this is different, and why you've been trying to get back on track. So this is a sample agreement. It's basically the tenant and your address, what upcoming payments are going to be missed or reduced or offset. So for example, if you do a payment plan, you're going to miss April and May's rent. You're going to add April and May's rent to June, July, August, the future rent. So for example, you'll split it down the middle, you'll do it 1/3, you'll pay like $100 on top of your rent. That's an easy payment plan that you can do. Another thing is sort of a forbearance where you basically have these 3 months free, and then you start it up again when the pandemic is, or the city is like the lockout is lifted. So that's a way to consider it, to talk to the landlord. But every agreement should be in writing and should contain signatures both of yourself and the landlord. Electronic email is permitted, but you want to make sure that you specify who you're speaking to. Is it the managing agent? Is it the landlord directly? Is it a broker? Who is it that you're speaking to? And ensure that they have the authority to enter this kind of agreement with you. And so that should be spelled out as well. If the agreement is sent and signed through fax or email, include a provision that electronic facsimile signatures should be deemed as original. That should be added to every agreement, because if you go to court and you have this agreement and it's a fax signature, the other side might say, hey, that's not legal proof and therefore it's not valid. But if you have that line in there, then you're covered. You should always print and save it for your records. And if, for example, it has to be modified after the fact, you still didn't find a job in June or July, then you have to include those months. So that modified document has to also be signed. The authority has to be clear, permission, and all the considerations have to be met in that modified document as well. Additional mitigation and solution items, suspend late fees and interest. You should tell the landlord, hey, this is a crazy situation. Can we suspend the late fees? Apply last month's deposit or security deposit to rent if applicable. A lot of landlords may not want to do this because your security deposit is technically not rent. I hear in the grapevine that there is some litigation coming up, not litigation, some possible law that may be passed where they will allow security deposits to be used as rent. If that hasn't passed, then rent is rent and security deposit is security deposit and can't be applied, but that's a conversation you can have with your landlord. Another thing is to suspend or defer rent and modify your lease. So for example, when I was talking about basically freezing the rent, you will extend your lease. So your lease is for 12 months, but because of this pandemic, you suspend your lease for 3 months and add it at the very end of your lease. So you get 3 additional months, and that's where you would pay your rent. These are all things that you have to talk to your landlord, the possible ideas of reaching some sort of agreement. It is really up to you. It's up to them as to what works best for both sides. Another consideration a lot of people have come up to us about is breaking your lease. Some people have decided that they would prefer to go back home, go with family, leave the country, do different things, and they are considering breaking their lease. If you break your lease, you have to consider the fact that the landlord needs to mitigate, meaning he has to make every reasonable effort to re-let the apartment. That may be hard during COVID, as not many people are looking for apartments or trying to leave their apartments, as everyone is supposed to be home. So the mitigation factor is something to consider, because it is not very reasonable for the landlord to find a new tenant during this time. Also, if you are thinking about breaking your lease, you have to have a clear conversation with your landlord as to what the terms are and that you're not going to be liable for the future rent if you move out. That has to be in writing, and it should be in writing to protect yourself and protect the landlord. Also, another thing you could do is if you want to break your lease, instead of breaking the lease, you could sublet or assign your lease to someone else, but you need the landlord's authority before you do that. So again, it is about communicating with your landlord as to what you would like to do. Housing court. Housing court is currently closed except for emergency actions, that is illegal lockouts, post evicts, as well as repairs for emergency or HP actions for emergency repairs. So new eviction cases cannot be filed. If you do receive a 30-day notice, a termination notice, a 3-day rent demand, these things are allowed. They can serve you the predicate notices, but they cannot start the case until the court is opened. So if you receive a notice of petition and it doesn't have a date, then that is invalid. Also, if you receive a notice of petition and petition without an index number, that is also invalid. So you can reach out to your landlord saying, hey, you sent me invalid documents. I know you're trying to scare me, but the courts are closed, and I know that the courts are closed. Another thing is eviction cases. Current eviction cases are not moving forward. So all court dates are being postponed. So everyone who has a court date should be receiving postcards from the courthouse. The postcard will tell you the future date of your court appearance. But those dates are also changing as well. So you should try to reach out to your attorney, reach out to the landlord, speak to the attorney on the other side about the future cases. But as of right now, every case is being adjourned. And judges are not issuing warrants because of the eviction moratorium. So marshals, of course, cannot lock you out. So I am actually going to pass it on to Alejandro Vera. He is a staff attorney with our group unit. Go for it, Alejandro.
Thanks, Christy. Hi, everyone. Thanks again for joining this call. This slide concerns repairs, as Christy just mentioned. Thank you. As Christy just mentioned, emergency repair cases are being heard by housing courts all over the city. Emergency repairs vary and are case dependent. Some examples include severe rodent infestation, severe mold in the apartment, lack of heat. I know it's warming up in the city. However, a lack of heat, if it's necessary, if it's cold enough, warrants an emergency. No hot water, no gas for cooking are emergency repairs that a court will hear currently. Serious code violations, these pair up really well with emergency repairs. So, for example, severe rodent infestation, severe mold, no hot water, no gas. These vary by the apartment and by the situation. It's important to consult an attorney if you're unsure if your situation qualifies as a repair. Thank you. Rent strikes. There's been a lot of conversation going on within the city about rent strikes and what tenants can do to take some control of the situation that's occurring with the pandemic. When a group of tenants come together and agree to refuse to collectively pay their rent until a specific list of demands is met by the landlord, that is a rent strike. This is usually a strategy of last resort. It's not something you want to lead with because courts generally appreciate when both parties are able to reconcile any differences or disagreements between an apartment or a building privately outside of a courtroom setting. However, rent strikes are illegal in New York City, and if you've heard information to the contrary, it's just not true. Tenants usually launch rent strikes to force landlords to deliver services such as heat, hot water, and to make repairs. This is a collective action. It's best to think of it in those terms. However, as Christy stated previously just a few minutes ago, rent is not canceled, and you should consult a housing attorney before exercising a rent strike. Again, it's a strategy of last resort. It's usually reserved for cases where petitions to a court have been made over and over and over again without much progress for the building or or particular tenants within a building. Rent strikes differ from rent cancellation. One is sort of affirmative action done by tenants, whereas rent cancellation is an order prescribed by a governing authority in regards to the situation like we've seen here, but rent has not been canceled yet. Lastly, tenant associations. I work within the group representation unit. Our mission is to identify buildings with needs, tenant needs, and we hope to, or what we try to do is to represent these buildings through our group representation unit. So each attorney is assigned to a building, they understand the ins and outs of the building and help form tenant associations. The purpose of a TA is to collectively bargain with a landlord on issues tenants face in common. That's the most important part there. Issues that tenants face in common. It's a voluntary association. No one gets paid to be in a tenant association, and no one should be getting paid or receiving any kind of compensation to do that work. Residents of any building can organize as tenant associations without fear of reprisal or pushback from their landlord. Building owners are also obligated to allow meetings to happen in common areas. For the most part, Brooklyn A deals with tenant association, helps to form tenant associations for at-risk populations, low-income populations, those living in supportive housing. However, tenant associations are also permissible in market rate apartments. They're less common though. If you'd like more information about forming a tenant association, Brooklyn A does have some resources and community organizers in-house who can help guide and answer questions you may have about either building a tenant association or strengthening one that already exists. Brooklyn A has taken the time to develop a FAQ for tenant rights. If you're interested in receiving a copy of these FAQs, please leave your email in the chat box. I saw that some folks have done that already. We hope to provide this resource to you as a guide to you and your friends to answer a lot of questions that folks are having in these uncertain times. Thank you so much. I think we've arrived to the question and answer section, which Sarah Block is going to manage and handle now.
Thank you, Alejandro and Christy. That was really, really helpful and educative. I hope that that information was really useful for everyone. So as Alejandro said, we'll start our question and answer section right now. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat room, or you can unmute yourself and we'll take them that way.
Okay. I have a question.
Hello.
Hello.
What is your name?
My name is Leonid, and actually I am a landlord, and I have like a small house with two tenants. One is paying, one is not. And the question is, can I ask him for proof why he cannot pay? Because he is saying, I lost a job, but I have money, but I don't want to pay. And now I cannot pay mortgage, I cannot pay property taxes. So am I allowed to ask him for his bank statement? Because he says, I have $50,000, but I don't know how long it's gonna last, so I just won't pay. What should I do?
So unfortunately, we work with tenants, and so we can't really give advice to landlords, but just sort of on a brief way, you cannot ask for private information like a bank statement. You can, of course, ask him for proof that he got laid off or he's unable to pay the rent, but you should reach out to a landlord's attorney. If you leave your email, then I can give you a referral for the Bar Association as well as other private attorneys who could help you.
Thank you, I did.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Leonid. And also we invite you to join us for our Know Your Rights session for homeowners. That will be coming up in, I think about 2 or 3 weeks, we'll be circulating those dates and times to the whole group.
And they can provide you a bit more advice.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
I see a question. If you have an eviction case that's already in housing court and you don't receive a postcard from the court telling you what the next court date is, you could also check out your case. Oh, that was Sam. Thanks, Sam, for sharing that.
Hi, I have a question. I live in a market rate building. We formed a tenants association because a handful of us really don't have any income. We created an email address from the tenants association and emailed the landlord with our sort of collective demands, kind of like rules or expectations. So if someone has lost all their income, we were asking for 3 months of rent forgiveness, no increased rent during this period, etc. Details like that. And the landlord will not respond to the tenants association. Well, they followed up with 3 different emails to every single tenant individually, asking us to respond individually. And I think a bunch of us want to respond individually because we don't want to we want to keep our homes we've been in for a long period of time. But we don't want to sort of jeopardize any negotiating power we would have to help out the other tenants that are in need. And I guess where we're at now is May rent's about to come up. We haven't paid April rent, but we don't know if we should just keep insisting, like keep emailing from the Tenants Association insisting that they respond to us there, or just say, you know, forget about it, everybody respond individually with your individual needs. I wondered if you would have any advice on that or resources to look into.
Leslie, thank you so much for your question. If I understand correctly, just to repeat for everybody's clarity, you live in a market rate apartment building. No one has paid rent since April, or many of you have not paid rent since April. You've formed a TA to increase your collective bargaining power, and the landlord is not responding to the tenant association emails and is requesting that individuals respond individually. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Great. I would, do you have any representation right now? I'm guessing the answer is no.
No, we just sort of listened in on some Zoom calls like this to try to get advice like from the Democratic Socialists, and we're going to listen to AOC's call tonight, and I was listening to this one. But yeah, I wondered if we need to get a lawyer. Yeah.
I think without understanding the details of your case, the best advice that anybody could give you right now is to make sure that your tenant association is seeking legal counsel and help. It's great that what you've done so far, it sounds like it's organized to some degree. Tenant's lawyer is going to help you get over that edge and give some detail to the demands that you've made to the landlord, and some legitimacy to, even though it's legitimate already, what you need to do. I know that many attorneys that represent tenant associations have a lower fee because they're representing a group instead of an individual. That might be something worthwhile for the tenant association. Brooklyn A does represent TAs and helps form them. However, there is an income threshold, and I'm not sure based on this conversation if you would meet that. But if you do leave your contact information, we can certainly refer you to the Bar Association's list of tenant lawyers, or we can maybe give some advice afterwards, depending on the nature of the case.
Or we could also do an intake to find out whether you guys are qualified for our services, and then we can represent you.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the folks in our building had jobs that paid well, and like someone like me, I don't have a job anymore. So
I think you guys qualify. It sounds like you meet the income threshold because it has to be current, not past.
Okay. So I guess I'll leave my email in the chat.
Yeah, Alejandro will reach out to you.
Okay, thank you.
I actually see a question from Yvonne asking whether the New York City Civil Courts has the authority to extend the moratorium for New York City Housing Court. I do not believe they do. I believe it is a governor's power. That's something we could actually research, and we can let you know. So if you want to let give us your email address, we can shoot out that answer.
Hi, good afternoon. Question, I'm Candace. Are you guys also providing advice for small businesses with commercial spaces?
We actually have a unit that deals with that, and I believe Sarah will share that information when they have their webinar.
Okay. All right.
Yes, we'll be holding a webinar specifically for small business owners. I believe it's next Wednesday, but I'll be sharing that information with the group.
Thank you.
But something that you should consider is some of the advice that we provided on here is relevant to you as well. It's always great to speak to your landlord about your concerns, whether you're thinking about closing or can't pay rent or need an extension on things. You should always try to negotiate with the landlord, but of course, try to get advice before you start.
Gotcha. Because actually, I have called my landlord already to actually speak about the issue and the problems that we're facing and the fact that we would be unable to meet the rent and so forth. But they're of the opinion that because the government are giving grants, well, not grants, but loans, that we should be recipients of it. And as a result, they are expecting their rent. So I found that a little bizarre. Yeah.
I think the landlord's thought that everyone's going to get it is a bit hopeful.
Yes.
But you should try to apply to as many grants, loans, and different things the city is providing. And then just show proof that you've applied for them and that you haven't been found eligible or you haven't been given the grant or the loan. And I think in that you can show, hey, we need to negotiate, we need to work out some sort of agreement.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
We have a question in the chat from Mohammed. I am the only person on my lease. It is through September 1st. My other 2 roommates are unemployed, but not on the lease. Am I on the hook for the remainder of the rent through September, or is there any recourse I might have?
So one question is the 2 roommates, they were brought into the apartment by you or by the landlord? Mohammed?
I mean, yes, by me.
They were brought by you. Okay. So yes, unfortunately, you're on the hook for the entire remainder of all the rent. If your roommates are unemployed, you can actually start a case against them, but that's something we can't give you advice for. But you are unfortunately on the hook for the lease.
I figured and I understand. Thank you so much all for doing this.
No problem, but also know that the city is providing different assistance to tenants in regards to rent. You can apply for a one-shot deal, you can apply for assistance from a charity or different community-based organizations. So there is help out there. So you should look around. We can provide a resource. We have a resource bank that we can provide. If you want to provide your email, we can send you the links.
Yeah, that would be amazing. Thank you so much.
No problem.
We have a question from Michelle. What if a tenant has a problem with another tenant in the building? Now that everyone is inside, the smoking has become a big problem for other tenants with asthma or other issues.
Do you want to deal with that one, Alejandro?
Yes, thank you. So the best thing I think you can do to start is to have a conversation with that tenant directly. Imagine you might have done this already, have a one-on-one conversation about this nuisance. And if there is no resolution there, I think it's appropriate to escalate it to your landlord and demonstrate that you've tried to resolve this issue between the 2 tenants that hasn't worked. Can the landlord please intervene because I believe that you're not supposed to be smoking indoors anyway, even in light of the pandemic. So do your best to reach a compromise and a meeting of the minds between you and the other tenant. And if it fails, despite your good faith efforts, escalate it to your landlord so that they can resolve it and demonstrate that you can review your lease. I'm sure there's a clause in there about not smoking in your unit. You can reference that clause to your landlord and politely ask them to address the issue because it is a nuisance. It's getting out of control and there needs to be more consideration given that everyone is occupying the same space more regularly. Did I answer your question?
I think you did.
No. Okay, thanks, Kristen.
We have a question. What can a tenant do if they feel they are being discriminated against because of their recent health status? What protection does the tenant have?
So you can reach out to the New York City Human Rights Commission and you can file a complaint. There's a lot of different organizations that also deal with discrimination in regards to your health. It is a protective class. The ADA clearly states what is a protected class if your disability rises to that. I'm not sure a person suffering from COVID is qualified for that. I don't know if the law has changed or there's been new law passing in order to include you in that special class. That is something we could actually do research on and find out. And if you want to leave your email, we can reach back out with that answer. But in regards to discrimination, you should file a complaint with the city, and they should be able to help you. Also, in regards to harassment, you can file a claim for harassment in housing court, but you have to show that that harassment is in a way to try to evict you from your apartment. And I'm not sure if you have those criteria in order to start that kind of case.
Thanks, Christy. Are there any other questions?
I think there's a question by Kago. It says,
Okay.
I've been trying to contact my landlord and they're usually notify us 90 days before the lease ends with a notice to renew. Our current lease ends June 30th. I'm concerned that they are waiting. I would like to know, are you rent stabilized? Can Kago unmute themselves? If not, it seems that it is rent stabilized because it's within 90 days, and that's sort of the standard with DHCR. If that is the case, then they are required to renew the lease within, or offer the renewal lease within that time period. And if they don't, then you can file a complaint with DHCR. But if they are obligated to give you a lease because you are rent stabilized and because of the COVID situation, I would just reach out to them and say, hey, I'm not sure if your office is closed. I'm not sure if you're having issues with administrative things like mailings. I haven't received my lease. I would like to renew my lease. Can you send it out? If you are not rent stabilized, then I would reach out to the landlord and say, hey, I want to renew my lease. I want to stay in this apartment. It is not a right to get that lease if you're on rent, on like your apartment's not regulated. So I really need to know what your legal status is in your apartment before I can really give you a fuller answer. But that's the two possibilities.
Okay, yeah, I think, thank you, Christy. I think it is rent stabilized. I'll have to double check our lease. I know that they have, and I did notice that it does mention that they should notify us. They have notified us last year late, and when they did that, they like extended our response time to renewal. So I guess I'm just concerned if they're waiting, you know, for after the moratorium, because I know that they had wanted to renovate our unit. I guess I'm just speculating their motives, which is probably silly to do, you know.
Yeah.
So I will just try to contact them again. They might be having administrative office issues, but it's just, I'm just concerned that we might get like a 30-day notice, you know, in May. You know, I'm just not really sure what our
So
rights are when the lease ends and if they haven't notified us.
no, if you're rent stabilized, they cannot evict you for just the fact that your lease has expired. They
Mhm.
need to offer you a lease within 90 days. If they do not, they cannot start a case because you didn't renew your lease. They could, if you are saying, I don't want to renew my lease for these reasons, then they can start a case. But if they've never offered you one, then they can't start a case. Also, because you're rent stabilized, there has to be a reason why they're starting a case. For example, you're a nuisance, your apartment is not your primary residence, you are using the apartment as an Airbnb. There's a lot of different reasons why they can start a case, but not renewing is one of them. But you have to basically tell the landlord, hey, I'm not renewing and these are the reasons. It's not because they don't offer. Is that clear?
Yeah, I did notify them that I did lose my job, but I have been paying, and I have a good rent
Relationship.
history
Okay.
with them. So I did just preempt them with some information.
No,
Um,
but they wouldn't be able to start a 30-day, like a holdover case against you for you not
okay.
paying rent. If you don't pay rent, then that would be a 3-day or a 6-day notice. And they would say, hey, you didn't pay your rent. That's why we're starting a case against you. So they do have the right to start a case, but not right now. They have to wait until the court opens again. But you're sort of protected. You live in a beautiful bubble in New York City because you live in a rent regulated apartment. So you really do not have much to fear. But I would just reach out to them again, let them know, hey, I haven't gotten my lease. And I think it's just administrative. Perhaps they're closed. Perhaps some people are sick. And I don't know how large your building is, but they're probably sending out a lot of leases. And so I would just give them some time and don't freak out. You're perfectly fine. And
Okay,
you have
thank you
us,
so much.
yeah, you have us as a resource. So definitely email us if anything. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Christy and Alejandro, how could I find out if I live in a rent stabilized apartment?
So it has to be more than 6 units and it has to be built before 1974. That's the first rule. Another thing you can do is contact DHCR. We can actually provide the phone number and you can get a rent history for your building and they will tell you if it's ever been registered. Also, there is a website with DHCR where you could actually look. They have a list of all the buildings in the city that are rent regulated. Not all of them are there, so you should just reach out to DHCR and they can let you know. Also, you can speak to your landlord and say, hey, I know that this building is more than 6 units and it's been built before 1974. I need a lease. So
You can also visit the Department of Buildings website to verify the date that your apartment building was constructed, and just maybe somebody can throw up in the chat the Department of Buildings website where you can search that really quickly and really easily.
also, if it was originally 6 units back in 74 and they changed it to 4 units, then they have to get authorization from the city to destabilize it. So it may be possible that your apartment is rent regulated even though it's less than 6 units. So with the DOB website, you look for the certificate of occupancy. In that certificate of occupancy, it can tell you how many units were originally in that building when it first was built. So that's a way to consider it as well. But the main source is the DHCR department. I don't know the acronym, but Housing and Consumer or something.
Great, thanks. And we have the links to those websites now in the chat box, so you can check them out there. Great. We have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So if anyone has them, please unmute yourself, ask a question, or leave it in the chat box.
There's a question from Kathy Santapuerto. She's asking if I'm assuming you had a holdover proceeding and you entered an agreement saying that you would move out. It is 100% likely that you're going to get an extension because of COVID. It is nearly impossible to find an apartment during this time. And so most judges will be able to give you an extension. You just have to prove that you've been trying to find an apartment and can't. And then also, so you should print out brokers cards, all the apartments that you try to see. So you have your proof that you are still looking. So that's what you should think about when you go back to court.
Great. Well, it seems like no one has any other questions for now. If there's any that come up, feel free to reach out to us. Our information is you can reach us either by email at info@bka.org, or the phone number is 718-487-2300. I'll list that again in the chat box. For anyone that sent their email addresses, and many of you did, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation as well as the FAQ documents. And we'll also send you our resource list that we recently put together that has this information as well as all kinds of different emergency services that are available right now, everything from food assistance to childcare. So feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions that come up in the coming months. Like I also mentioned, this is the first in a series of workshops. We'll be doing one a week for the next several weeks in all of our program areas. We will soon have the list of dates and topics available, and we hope that you have found today to be helpful, and that you'll continue to join us in the coming weeks. Thank you all so much for joining us. We hope that you stay safe and well during this time period and beyond. And feel free to reach out to Brooklyn A with any other needs that you have.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Be
Thank
well.
you. Sarah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Are you going to copy and paste all these emails, or?
Yeah, I'll do that. Thanks,
Be safe.
everyone.
Bye, Shimon.
Bye, Shimon. Thank you, everyone. Be safe.
I wonder if there's a way of like printing it out.
There, yeah, when I save the presentation, it gives me a copy, so I can email it to you.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you to both of you. Great job.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Jesse.
Take care.
Bye.